of day 4 free papers. We'll be having 3 moderators and 10 speakers. The time allotted for each presentation is a total of 6 minutes. That is 5 minutes for the presentation and 1 minute for discussion with the moderator. May I now invite the moderator for session 1, Dr. Pradeep Saljia. Let me welcome our first speaker, Dr. Binoy Verghese. His topic for the day is Prevalence and Risk Factors of New Onset Diabetes After Transplantation in Renal Allograft Recipients, a Single-Center Observational Study. Sir, please.
Good morning, respected sir. I'm going to present the study, The Prevalence and Risk Factors of New Onset Diabetes After Transplantation in Renal Allograft Recipient. It's a single-center observational study. The term New Onset Diabetes After Transplantation, also known as the NODAT, was first used in 2003. It is defined as the development of diabetes for the first time after transplantation in a previously non-diabetic transplant recipient, and it is applicable only to those patients without any previous pre-transplant diagnosis of diabetes mellitus or on a stable maintenance immunosuppressive regime and who doesn't have any ongoing acute infections. The aim of the study is to assess the prevalence and risk factors associated with NODAT in renal transplant recipients. The study population includes those renal transplant recipients attending the post-renal transplant clinic in Madurai Medical College. It's a cross-sectional observational study. Those patients with symptoms of diabetes or RBS more than 200 mg per deciliter or an FBS more than 126 mg per deciliter on more than one occasion, and the 2 or PPS more than 200 mg per deciliter or an HbA1c more than 6.5% was included in the study. Those patients with a pre-transplant documented diabetes mellitus or a history of transient post-transplant diabetes, that is defined as hyperglycemia within 1 month of transplant and spontaneously resolved within 3 months, were excluded from the studies. A detailed history and clinical examination, including BMI, were taken, and the data were collected from the renal transplant record of the patient. The patients then were further divided into NODAT and non-NODAT group, and their demographic, biochemical, and immunosuppressive parameters were compared using appropriate statistical methods. Coming to results, a total of 80 patients were studied, out of which 21 patients were diagnosed to have NODAT. The prevalence comes around 26%. Out of these 21 patients, 61% of the patients were diagnosed to have NODAT within 1 year of transplantation. In our study, we couldn't find any sex predilection for the development of NODAT. Although the donor age was mildly increased in the NODAT group, it was not statistically significant. The type of transplant, whether it is an LRRT or a DDRT, the type of transplant didn't have any significant effect on the development of NODAT. 4 patients had a history of delayed graft function. The induction agents used were divided into the basiliximab group, ATG group, or whether they were not given any induction. But neither of these groups had any statistically significant effect on the development of NODAT. Regarding the immunosuppression use, all the patients were given corticosteroids, and further, these immunosuppressive agents, these patients were divided into different groups. That is, almost 59 patients were given tacrolimus plus MMF, 6 patients was given cyclosporin plus MMF, 4 had tacrolimus plus azathioprine, 5 had cyclosporin with azathioprine. Only 1 patient had a tacrolimus, everolimus, and MMF. 1 had everolimus plus MMF, and 4 had only azathioprine. And we compared these groups, but we couldn't find any significant association with NODAT. Regarding hypertension, 81% of the patients in the NODAT group were found to be hypertensive, and 62.7% in the NODAT group were found to be hypertensive. But we couldn't find any statistical significant association with NODAT. Coming to lipid profile, the total cholesterol, triglyceride, and the LDL were significantly elevated in NODAT group, and the BMI was also significantly elevated in the NODAT group. Coming to risk factors like acute rejection, HCV infection, and CMV infection, the percentage in acute history of acute rejection were around 22%, HCV infection were around 38%, and CMV infection were around 13% in the NODAT group, and these 3 factors were found to have a significant association with NODAT. Coming to variables like urea, creatinine, spot urine PCR. Although the urea and creatinine were slightly increased in the NODAT group, it didn't show any statistical significance. But the uric acid was elevated in the NODAT group and was found to be a significant risk factor for development of NODAT. The spot urine PCR was also slightly elevated, but that too was not statistically significant. Then we studied the mean tacrolimus trough levels. It was slightly higher in NODAT group, that was 7.77 nanogram per ml, and it was found to have a significant correlation with the development of NODAT. Coming to a treatment part, 66% of the patients of NODAT patients were treated with OHS alone, and the rest were treated with a combination of OHA and insulin. By doing the binary logistic regression study, higher BMI and associated HCV infection were found to be independent risk factors for the development of NODAT. So going through the previous literature, the prevalence comes around 4 to 25% renal transplant, and the risk factors were broadly divided into modifiable and not modifiable risk factors. And in the modifiable part, the immunosuppression, history of HCV infection, CMV infection, all comes in the modifiable part. So NODAT, the studies have shown that it has an adverse impact on patient survival, increased risk of graft rejection and graft loss, and 2 to 3-fold increased risk of fatal and non-fatal cardiovascular events as compared with non-diabetic patients. So to conclude, NODAT in renal transplant patients is common yet an important complication. In our study, the prevalence of NODAT appears to be higher in subjects with family history of diabetes mellitus, increased body mass index, acute rejection episode, HCV infection, CMV infection, higher tacrolimus trough levels, higher uric acid levels, and dyslipidemia. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's a good study. But did you notice overall the comparison of the steroids in the two groups, which had a little higher steroid level or between the two groups, NODAT and non-NODAT group?
Actually, sir, most of the patients, all the patients were steroid group, sir. Were given steroid.
But the higher group, because of the rejection episodes, are so different. What in higher steroid levels as compared to the non-NODAT group?
No, sir, we didn't do the study the dose of the steroid.
Thank you. Is there any other question from the other moderators?
So the other moderators couldn't make it. They're not here.
Okay, right. I think it's okay with Mr.
Thank you, sir. On to the next presentation. I welcome Dr. Virendra Chauhan. His topic for the day is outcome of kidney transplants from expanded criteria donors. Sir, please.
Successful kidney transplant offers much better quality of life, improved survival, and is less expensive in the long run. The gap between the need and availability of kidneys is widening, and many patients die waiting for kidney transplant. This gap can be narrowed by accepting kidneys from expanded criteria donors. We need to understand what is the outcome of kidney transplant with kidneys from expanded criteria donors. So this was a study to determine outcome of patients who have received kidneys from an expanded criteria donors. We included patients from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2021. 40 adult patients received kidney from deceased donors. 17 received grafts from expanded criteria donors. One patient died intraoperatively of cardiac cause. This patient was excluded from the analysis. To define expanded criteria donor is defined as donor more than 60 years of age or a donor more than 50 years of age with at least two of the following criteria, that is history of hypertension, death from stroke, or a creatinine of more than 1.5. Before accepting expanded criteria donor, we ensured that estimated creatinine clearance was more than 60 ml per minute based on baseline creatinine. If creatinine clearance is between 50 to 60 ml per minute, we consider dual kidney transplant. We always looked at the prior reports to determine the element of AKI which was there. The induction immunosuppression which our center used was thymoglobulin or basiliximab, depending on the recipient characteristics. Maintenance immunosuppression was tacrolimus, mycophenolate, and prednisolone. Prophylaxis, again, opportunistic infection included cotrimoxazole and valganciclovir. Of 16 patients included in the analysis, there were 11 males and 5 females. The mean age of these patients was 48 plus minus 13 years, and range was from 30 to 70 years. This table shows the results of the studies. It includes all of the recipients of the study, and along with that, we can see that there are two recipients who have received a dual kidney transplant, as well as their baseline creatinine on discharge, as well as 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. Here we can see that the dual kidney, the transplant recipients, all of them had a very good creatinine at the end, and the graft survival and patient survival was almost 100% at the end of 36 months. Our study shows that kidneys from properly selected expanded criteria donors can give good outcome with results far superior to outcome that can be achieved on dialysis. When selecting expanded criteria donors, it is important to look at baseline renal function, that is urine analysis, and creatinine. When baseline creatinine clearance is less than 60 ml per minute, better to go for a dual kidney transplant. It is also important to minimize ischemia time. accepting ECD kidneys can narrow the gap between the need and supply of the kidneys.
Thank you, sir. The session is open for discussion.
So in the two groups, do you find that in the patients with expanded criteria donor, the consultation time was longer? Did you compare
Sorry,
the
sir, I cannot.
the
Sir, I cannot hear
hospitalization?
you.
Yeah, the hospitalization period was longer in the expanded criteria donor. Did you compare the two? The significant.
Sir, they usually their hospitalization was still almost 10 days on an average, which
There's
was
a difference between the two groups.
yeah. So we have not compared the two groups especially, but on an average it is around 10.
As far as the cost is concerned, this also matters because if expanded criteria donor has to stay in the hospital for a long time, the cost adds to treatment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this point should also be considered that how much was the hospitalization in the expanded criteria donor. I mean, this point you should also look for.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Next, I invite Dr. Shubhi Kamtan. The free paper topic is urinary soluble CD163 and CD163 plus M2 macrophage tissue infiltration in antibody mediated renal allograft rejection. Over to you, ma'am.
Greetings for the day. The topic of my presentation is urinary soluble CD163 and CD163 positive M2 macrophage tissue infiltration in antibody mediated renal allograft rejection. So starting with the introduction, the renal allograft injury is associated with immune cell infiltration. We know that renal allograft rejections occur via cellular, humoral, and combined mechanisms, where antibody-mediated rejection, which is one of the leading cause of allograft dysfunction, is characterized by macrophages and monocyte infiltration, where macrophages are known to have a central role in promoting the renal inflammation. Macrophages contribute to both acute and chronic renal allograft injury via different mechanisms like co-stimulation, cytokine production, antigen presentation, etc. Very few studies have reported the role of glomerular macrophage in renal allograft rejection. This photomicrograph shows the differentiation of macrophages. Here we can see the M1 macrophages and M2 macrophages. There are two subsets of macrophages that are phenotypically and functionally different. M1 acts as a pro-inflammatory marker and M2 acts as anti-inflammatory marker, where CD163, that is a glycosylated membrane protein, is a marker for M2 macrophages, and when it is enzymatically cleaved, it forms soluble CD163. So starting with the aims and objectives, the first aim is to evaluate the degree of M2 macrophage infiltration in acute antibody-mediated rejection and its correlation with graft function. And second was to estimate the urinary and serum soluble CD163 levels to analyze their role as non-invasive biomarker. After the aims and objectives, now coming to the material and methods, patients with for-cause biopsies based on their histological findings according to the Banff criteria were enrolled for this study between January 2021 to July 2021, and we have collected blood and urine samples for this study. We have included the patients below the age of 60 years and age and sex-matched healthy controls, and we have excluded the elderly patients, children. We have also excluded the patients with known fibroizing illness, uncontrolled hypertension, and diabetes. Renal allograft patients with inadequate biopsy tissue for histology were also excluded. Now, starting with the methods, immunohistochemistry with periodic acid shift staining was done for CD163, where we have taken 3 micron of formalin, fixed paraffin embedded sections on polylysine slides and fixed them at 56 degrees for 2 hours. After that, immunohistochemistry was done in Ventana using rabbit anti-human monoclonal CD163 as primary antibody. And we have done periodic acid shift staining on the IST slides in order to delineate the basement membrane and to make the counting of the cells more specific. Cells in these stained slides were counted in the glomerular and tubulum-interstitial region under microscope at 40x magnification, where we have analyzed the cells as number of cells per 10 high power field in the tubulum-interstitial region and number of cells per 10 glomerulus in the biopsy. We've also done the ELISA for urine and serum samples for urinary and for serum and urinary soluble CD163 according to the manufacturer's protocol. And all the graft biopsies were classified according to the Banff criteria. This photomicrograph shows this CD163 positive macrophages in the glomerulus and tubulonterstitial region. Here, in the case of ABMR, we can appreciate the presence of the macrophages in the glomerulus as well as in the tubulonterstitial region. That is not so significant in the case of NER. Now, coming to the demographic and clinical representations, here we can see that the mean age of the patients with antibody-mediated rejection is 36.2. There was no significant difference in the serum creatinine of both the groups, but there was significant difference in the CD163 positive cells in the glomerulus of ABMR than in comparison to the NER. And there was also no significant difference in the macrophage infiltration in the tubulonterstitial region of both the groups. For this urinary soluble CD163, we have got significant levels, but it was not detected in no evidence of rejection. So coming to the results, the graft biopsies with ABMR had significantly higher infiltration of glomerular CD163 positive macrophages than NER. The tubulonterstitial CD163 positive macrophage infiltration was slightly higher in ABMR than no evidence of rejection, and the macrophage infiltration in the glomerulus was significantly correlated with urinary soluble CD163 levels. Though this study includes a very small number of samples, as this was a pilot study, in future we'll try to include more number of samples. So by this study, we have concluded that increased CD163 positive macrophage infiltration in the glomerulus and elevated urinary soluble CD163 levels suggested a significant role of M2 macrophages in the pathogenesis of ABMR. And we can also say that urinary soluble CD163 can also be used as a non-invasive biomarker where the biopsy is not required. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhi, for such a nice original lab work. Now, only thing is, what do we interpret from this? That the higher number of 163 positive cells would indicate a ABMR, right? So the more
Yes.
the high, is more chances of damage and less recovery. I mean, did you compare with these patients whether that the one which had a less number of these cells and those who had a higher number of 163 M positive cells, did they have a poorer recovery? Did they have more fibrosis, or their ABMR did not improve after the treatment? Did you have any such sort of observation? I mean, the higher the number of the biopsy, the recovery was not good, or the response to treatment was not good. Or do you have something on long-term follow-up also on these patients?
Sir, right now we didn't have that.
Okay. So do you think, I mean, overall what I interpret from it is that higher the number, the chances would be a bad ABMR, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good study. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Moderator, kindly note there is a slight change in the schedule. Our next speaker would be Dr. Manas Gope. The topic for discussion is induction agents in living donor kidney transplantation, long-term outcome. Sir, you may please.
My topic is induction agents in living donor kidney transplantation, long-term outcomes, sir. A single center study. Induction agents are widely used in the West. 83% of the kidney transplant in US receive induction. Many biological agents have been found to be reduce the incidence of acute rejection in the first 6 months of kidney transplantation. No evidence suggests that induction agent use improved long-term patient and graft survival. And definitely there's a fear of predisposition of infections in the developing countries like India, where more grafts are lost due to infections-related complications. And definitely cost is a bigger issue among depleting and non-depleting antibodies. No agents still now clearly proven to be superior. We did a retrospective study to assess the long-term outcome and adverse events associated with an induction agent used for living donor kidney transplantation. A study done in Guwahati Medical College. It is a single center study. Materials method retrospective studies done in Guwahati Medical College, Assam. Demographic, clinical and laboratory data of living kidney donation transplant recipient 2006 to 2015 were collected. We divided into two groups, induction and no induction groups. The induction groups again further divided into those receiving ATG group and those receiving IL-2RB group. This is basiliximab group. Inclusion criteria: all living donor kidney transplant from January 2006 to December 2015. Exclusion criteria: HLA desensitization protocol transplant and ABU incompatible transplant, they are excluded. Total 25 patients received 50 milligram of ATG intraoperatively before releasing the clamps, 25 milligram on day 1 and day 2, and 15 patients received first dose of 20 milligram of Vasiliximab before the graft reperfusion, followed by second dose 20 milligram on day 4 post-operatively. All patients received IV methylprednisolone pulse for 3 days. Maintenance immunosuppression was steroid, tacrolimus, and mycophenolate 1.5 to 2 gram per day. The dose of MMF and adjusted according to the CBC dose of tacrolimus by trough level. All patients received valganciclovir for 3 months and cotrimoxazole for 6 months post-transplantation. Outcome was evaluated on basis of patient and graft survival, acute rejection, infection, leukopenia, anemia, thrombocytopenia, new onset diabetes mellitus, 1 year serum creatinine, death at 5 years. Statistical analysis done by SPSS. Results: total our sample size is small, 58 out of 45 male and 13 are female. Most common cause of renal failure is CSGN, 44.8%. Diabetic nephropathy only 17.2%. Out of 58%, 25, that's 43.1% received ATG, and 15%, 25.8% received Vasiliximab as an induction therapy. All patients received immunosuppression agent consisting of either Tacro, MMF, or steroid. There was no significant difference between these two groups regarding demographic and clinical data. Out of 58%, leukopenia and anemia prevalence was same, 18.9%, and thrombocytopenia is 15.5%. And this is the parameters. This is the comparison between two groups. There is a receiving ATG group, another group receiving Vasiliximab group. And among that group, the anemia, HLA mismatch, leukopenia, thrombocytopenia, fungal infection, acute rejections. If you go this data, that there is no significant, statistically significant differences there. Again, graft survival and CMV infection same. There is no statistically significant. But if you go to the, if we compare induction and no induction group, then we can see that this prevalence of tuberculosis and acute rejections is more high in no induction groups, and this is statistically significant, as well as 1 year median serum creatinine volume is also statistically significantly different. But if we analyze the data in long term, that is 5 years, graft survival 5 years, and patient survival, then the difference is not significant. So then in discussion, this is our study that is done by 2006 to 2015. The big issue, the sample is less, only 58. Again, same study done by Radhakrishna et al. In our India study, and the another is the Grala et al. This is 2010. These all are the retrospective observational study, and both three studies shown that acute rejection in induction as well as non-induction group, as I seen that acute rejection is statistically high in non-induction group, as well as TB is statistically high in no induction groups. But in long term, if you analyze the data as in aspect of graft survival and patient survival, then this is not statistically significantly different. And the acute rejections and graft survival in ATG versus Vasiliximab group, there is no statistically different. So conclusion may be drawn in this study, though the sample size is small, that the use of induction agent is associated with significant reduction of acute rejection and tuberculosis, and that there are no significant difference between Vasiliximab and ATG. Thank you.
Thank you, Manas. Can you tell me how did you choose these three different groups in the induction? How did you choose these groups? That the
Sir,
one in the Vasiliximab, one which one in the ATG group, and which one in the control group?
Sir, generally, ATG group, those are high-risk patients. Those are high-risk patients, such as having history of blood transfusion. Yeah, donor is young, donor is aged. Yeah, recipient is young, and there is a history of repeated blood transfusion, sir. Then we give that group of patients ATG, sir. And if there is no history of any exposure of blood transfusion, and the donor is not so much young, and there is HLA mismatch, though HLA mismatch in both the groups is not statistically significantly different, but these are the rough criteria, sir. Actually, there is no clean flat.
So what it appears that is automatically some bias is going on in selection process, right?
Sure, sure.
Selecting a already high risk group for this. Secondly, you studied only for tuberculosis infection, or did you look for other infections as well, like BK viremia or other things?
Sir, I studied also, sir, BK virus as well as CMV, but statistical sample only, there's a data, only there's a 5 to 6 patients, sir. That's why I am unable to put this data. But CMV infections, I put the data in the chart, sir. CMV, there is no statistically significant difference, sir, in both these groups.
Thank you.
We now invite Dr. Krishna Ravindran for the free paper presentation on clinical profile and outcome of COVID in renal transplant recipients. Sir, please.
Good morning. My topic is clinical profile and outcome of COVID in renal transplant recipients. Renal transplant recipients have increased mortality and morbidity associated with COVID-19 infection. However, there is paucity of data on the outcome of COVID in renal transplant recipients. Aims and objectives: to study the clinical profile, impact on graft function, and outcome of COVID in renal transplant recipients. To compare the clinical profile and outcome of COVID in renal transplant recipients between the two waves of COVID. It's a prospective study done in Institute of Nephrology, Madras Medical College, Chennai. The study population includes renal transplant recipients who contracted COVID. The timeline from March 2020 to February 2021 is taken as first wave, and the timeline from March 2021 to July 2021 is taken as second wave. We analyze the oxygen requirements, graft dysfunction, CT severity, and mortality rates. Our study includes a total of 135 patients. First wave includes 72 patients. 80% of them are males. The mean age in first wave is 42 years. The median transplant duration is 72 months. Second wave includes 63 patients, of which 89% of them are males. The mean age is 39 years. Median transplant duration is 60 months. Both first and second wave had patients who majority of them had undergone live transplants in the past. Comparing the first and second wave, the NODAT is seen in 52% of patients in second wave compared to 30% of patients in first wave. Hypertension is seen in 56% of patients in second wave compared to 40% of patients in first wave. Regarding symptomatic illness at presentation, all patients admitted during second wave are symptomatic, whereas 91% of patients in first wave were symptomatic. Oxygen requirement during admission, 51% of patients during first wave and 63% of patients in second wave required oxygen. Graft dysfunction, 61% of patients in first wave and 79% of patients in second wave had graft dysfunction during admission. Of these 5 parameters, presence of NODAT, symptomatic illness at presentation, graft dysfunction were statistically significant in second wave. Our unit protocol, we used to reduce the dose of immunosuppression in patients with severe COVID. Regarding anti-proliferative dosage reduction, 76% of patients in first wave and 75% of patients in second wave required anti-proliferative dosage reduction. And calcineurin inhibitor dosage reduction was required in 36% in first wave and 26% in second wave. Comparing the CT severity between the two waves, higher grades of CT severity as grade 3 and grade 4 is seen in second wave when compared to first wave. The pre-COVID serum creatinine less than 1.4 is seen in 52% of patients in first wave and 61% of patients in second wave. Creatinine more than 1.4 is seen in 48% of patients in first wave and 39% of patients in second wave. Regarding graft dysfunction, 87 patients had graft dysfunction. We classified them based on Akin staging. Stage 1 includes 56 patients. Stage 2 includes 12 patients. Stage 3 includes 19 patients. Complete renal recovery with the return to baseline GFR was seen in 46 patients. Incomplete renal recovery was seen in 22 patients on follow-up. 19 patients with acute worsening of graft function died during admission. 15 patients required dialysis, 7 during the first wave, 2 of them died, 5 became dialysis dependent. 8 patients during second wave required dialysis, all of them died during admission. Allograft biopsy. 8 patients underwent allograft biopsy for persistent graft dysfunction on follow-up. 3 had graft pyelonephritis. 3 had cellular rejection. 3 had active ABMR. Patients with the biopsy-proven rejection were treated with immunosuppression dose reduction during COVID admission. With treatment of rejection, all patients had partial recovery of graft function. 6 patients received COVID vaccination during second wave. 4 patients received 1 dose and 2 patients received 2 doses. All of them recovered from COVID. 1 patient developed graft loss due to transplant renal artery thrombosis during second wave. COVID-related mucormycosis. First wave included 1 patient. He died during admission. In second patient, 5 patients had mucormycosis, of which 1 of them died. Both the patients who died had concurrent mucormycosis during COVID illness. Comparing the mortality, the first wave, the mortality is 12.5%, and in second wave, it is 30.2%, which is statistically higher in second wave compared to first wave. Coming to conclusion, overall mortality of COVID in renal transplant recipients in our center is 20.74%. Compared to general population in our center is 4.6%, which is around 5 times higher. Mortality in second wave is higher than first wave. The symptomatic illness at presentation and graft dysfunction were significantly higher during second wave when compared to first wave. Thank you.
So, Krishna, did you stratify the patients who had a COVID, whether they required oxygen or did not require oxygen, or they were in ICU, or they were the ventilators? So, did you classify or stratify these groups of COVID patients?
No, sir. We didn't classify based on the.
For example, in a patient, they are ICU and the ventilator, their mortality would be much more high as compared to patients in the ward. So, no such sort of differentiation between them.
No, we didn't differentiate based on this.
And the types of infection, do you find anything different in infection in this group?
Sir?
Did you find any infection, type of viral infections?
No, sir. We didn't have any different viral infection.
So, I think overall what I would say that the mortality is about close to 20% in your group.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. And in the various groups, once they stratify that in some it is the overall mortality is about 11% in our Indian population. And a lot of it is all depending in the stratification. For example, somebody on ventilator, the mortality would be close to 96% or so.
Yes, sir. But the previous studies which were published includes only first wave patients, sir. But when we compare with include the second wave, the mortality is getting higher.
Why do you think the mortality is high in second wave? What's the reason for such a deterioration second wave?
Maybe we are thinking of the virulence of the virus is high.
Change in the virus virulence, number one. Yes. Maybe higher steroid dose in the second group?
No, sir. We didn't change our treatment protocol between the two groups.
Next, I invite Dr. Shivakumar S. Patil. The free paper topic is Prospective Observational Study on Urinary Tract Infection in Post-Renal Transplant Patients at a Tertiary Care Center from North India.
Today, I'll be presenting a prospective observational study which was done at our center, which includes post-renal transplant urinary tract infections. As we know, UTI which occurs in first 6 months of post-transplant period, the UTI which occurs within first 6 months are serious and compared to those which occurs later stage, which has a adverse graft outcomes and which reduces survival function as well as patient survival in post-transplant patient. UTI is one of the major morbidity and mortality cause in post-transplant patients. If we can do thorough pre-transplant screening as well as early identification of UTI and proper antibiotic treatment, the incidence of UTI can be reduced. That will help in increased longevity of the graft. The objective of this study was, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
The objective of the study was to determine the incidence and associated factors that causes urinary tract infection in post-transplant patient. This was a prospective observational study done at our center, which included 291 transplant recipients. All patients who are undergoing renal transplantation were followed up in OPD, and those who have documented UTI, which is defined by the culture positive, the colony count is more than 10 to the power of 5 with the lower urinary tract symptoms. A total of 291 patients were enrolled in the study. Out of 234 males and 57 patients were females, in which 31 renal transplant recipients with urinary tract infections were enrolled, in which 23 were males and 8 patients were female. Out of 31 patients, 24 are live donor transplants and 7 were cadaveric renal transplants. Most of the patients had hypertension as diabetes as comorbid conditions, and diabetes is one of the known risk factors to cause UTI in post-transplant patients. The most common organism isolated was E. coli, followed by Klebsiella, and a few patients had Pseudomonas, Enterococcus, and Acinetobacter. All the patients were treated as per their antibiogram with respect to the culture, and 5 patients had multi-drug resistant organisms which required colistin in 4 patients, and 1 patient we treated with tigecycline. And out of 31 patients, 17 patients required decrease in immunosuppression. 5 patients we had to stop both mycophenolate as well as tacrolimus, and 8 patients we had to stop only MMF, and 4 patients we reduced the dose of MMF. Out of 31 patients, 3 patients had a mortality. It's around 9.6%. The mean baseline creatinine before an episode of UTI was 1.44, and during the course of infection, it rose to 2.25. And mean creatinine after infection was 1.62. With each episode of UTI, patient always had some amount of graft dysfunction, and post-treatment creatinine in most of the patient does not return back to its normal value. In 31 patients, 19 patients had a complicated UTI, and 11 patients had uncomplicated UTI with without any systemic symptoms. And asymptomatic bacteriuria was seen in 1 individual, and recurrent UTI was seen in about 8 patients, that is 25.8%. That was a significant number out of 31. In this table, we can see each episode of UTI always results in some amount of graft dysfunction. The mean creatinine before an episode of UTI was 1.4, and post UTI it was 1.6. Before I conclude my talk, UTI is a major complication in post-transplant patient. The risk factors include diabetes, any post-transplant urinary leak, redo surgery, or prolonged catheterization, or degestion placement, or if patient is having any post-transplant wound infection, or any prior history of renal stone disease, pre-transplant history of any urinary tract infections, or urinary tract instrumentation pre-transplant. Most UTI usually occurs in first 6 months because of the probably related to higher immunosuppression. E. coli remains the most common isolate in UTI patients, and Klebsiella pneumoniae being the next, which most of the times it is a multi-drug resistant, which needs aggressive antibiotic therapy. Sometimes may continue with a suppressive antibiotic therapy for long term. The incidence of complicated UTI is much more higher as compared to uncomplicated UTI in post-transplant patients. And early post-transplant UTIs are detrimental to the renal graft outcome. If we identify it in early stage and we can treat it, the longevity of the graft can be increased. Also, it can reduce the incidence of recurrent UTI. Thank you for your kind attention.
Did you have all these patients on prophylaxis right from beginning for, or when?
In our institute policy is to put on all the patients without any UTI on cotrimoxazole. But right, those patients had UTI and treated with recurrent UTI patients. Most of the times we keep on prophylaxis.
And did you find any bladder dysfunction in any of these patients? Did you do a urological studies pre-op in all these patients pre-transplant?
So not in all the patients. Those patients who have any history of recurrent UTI in pre-transplant period, or any history of CACUT, congenital anemia of urinary tract, or neurogenic bladder, or any history of congenital anomalies like spina bifida, or in those patients only we have did a thorough urological evaluation, not for all the patients.
So what's your take-home message overall with this?
I think whenever we have a urinary tract infection in post-transplant period, it has to be treated, even though patients sometimes have asymptomatic illness going on. So surveillance cultures are mandated in those patients who had any history of UTI. So probably most of the post-transplant patient with history of UTI requires prolonged antibiotic therapy. If we treat inadequately, then most of the patient at least require 6 weeks of IV antibiotics therapy if they have any history of recurrent UTI, and also prophylaxis.
Right. So all of them have been on MMF. And what was the dose for MMF? Because you had reduced dose of MMF in UTI group. So
Sir, those patients who have mild systemic illness, we usually reduce to the half dose. If they are on 720 or 1 gram BD, we reduce to 500 mg.
Okay. Thank you, Shivkumar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Next, I invite Dr. Jeetu Joseph Epen. The free paper topic is Clinical Profile and Outcomes of COVID-19 Infection among Renal Transplant Recipients.
I'm going to be talking about the clinical profile and outcomes of COVID-19 infection among renal transplant recipients. This is a single center experience from CMC Vellore. Aim of the study was to study the clinical course of renal transplant recipients who presented with virologically confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection and to assess the risk factors associated with mortality due to the infection among renal transplant recipients. This was a prospective analysis of all patients who presented to CMC with virologically confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection. The transplant details, clinical features of infection, and the outcomes and the risk factors associated with the mortality were studied in this population. As previously mentioned, we saw 2 waves of infections. The first wave peaked around September, October, and the second wave started around March and peaked by April and May. So first wave is up to February was considered first wave, and second wave was considered from March onwards was considered as the second wave of infection. Looking at the baseline characteristic of the patients, totally there were 37 patients who were included in the study. The mean age was around 40 years, predominantly male, 78%. Living donors were predominantly 75% versus 25% was a deceased donor. The transplant vintage was about 5 years post-renal transplant, median transplant vintage. Around 29% of patients had diabetes at presentation. The induction agent used was ATG in 40% and 60% had besiliximab. Immunosuppression, all patients were on prednisolone. 97% of patients were on tacrolimus, 81 on mycophenolate, and a few patients on cyclosporin and everolimus. Of the 37 patients, 21% of the patients had history of a prior rejection. 5 had ACR, 3 had an antibody-mediated rejection, for which 21% had received pulse steroids and 5% had received ATG prior to this. The baseline creatinine at presentation was 1.68 milligram per person. Looking at the clinical features of these patients, they predominantly presented with fever in 64%, cough 40%, diarrhea in 21%, and breathing difficulty was present in 37% of patients. The WBC count median values were 7,400, LDH was 656, ferritin 517, D-dimer 587, and CRP was 43. The disease severity classification, most patients were either asymptomatic or had mild infections, totally combined about 48%. Moderate infection was seen in 13.5%, and severe infection was seen in 37.8% of patients. And 18.9% patients required ICU admission. Acute kidney injury was seen in 48.6% of the patients in this cohort. Predominantly Akin stage 1, but a significant number also had Akin stage 3. That is 44.4% of patients had Akin stage 3 AKI. 21.6% of these patients required RRT. The treatment of immunosuppression reduction, antimetabolite, the dose was reduced by 25%, with mostly in patients with asymptomatic and mild infections do not require any change in the metabolite dose. Dose reduction was done in 58%, and discontinuation of the antimetabolite was done in 16.7%. Similarly, CNI, most patients did not require dose change. Dose reduction was done in 2.8%, and discontinuation was done in 11%. The overall mortality among this cohort of patients of renal transplant recipients was 24.3%, but the mortality was much higher in patients who had AKI, 44%, and all patients who required dialysis died due to the illness. Again, as the previous speaker had mentioned, we also compared the severity of infection between the first and the second wave. Here, second wave was defined as March onwards. We found that the severity of infection was much higher in the second wave as compared to the first wave. In the first wave, predominant patients, 68% of patients had mild infections compared to 20%, whereas severe infections in the second wave, 73% of patients had severe infection as compared to only 13% in the first wave. So this was significantly different. Similarly, other parameters of severity like ICU admission, acute kidney injury, RRT requirement were all higher in the second wave as compared to the first wave, but they were not statistically significant because of the small sample size. Inflammatory markers like CRP were also significantly higher in the second wave. Ferritin and D-dimer was also higher in the second wave, but it did not reach statistical significance. Similarly, mortality was also higher in the second wave, 40% as compared to 13.6%. It was approaching significance, but p-value was 0.07, so we can't call it statistically significant. So overall infection severity and mortality was higher in the second wave as compared to the first wave. We assessed the risk factors of mortality. Age was associated, p-value was not significant. Similarly, diabetes also was considered, but diabetes was not a important risk factor, probably because of the presence of other immunosuppressants. Second wave of infection, as I mentioned earlier, was associated with a higher risk, although not statistically significant. The only risk factor which was associated with mortality was one, severity of the disease. So patients who presented with a severe disease had a higher risk of mortality. Patients with acute kidney injury also had a higher risk of mortality as compared to patients without acute kidney injury. But on multivariate analysis, only the severity of the disease was associated with mortality. Conclusions, renal transplant recipients have a higher mortality and a higher risk of acute kidney injury as compared to the general population. Patients in the second wave presented with more severe disease. Mortality was also higher during the second wave, although it was not statistically significant in our study. Severity of infection and AKI were associated with an increased risk of mortality in univariate analysis. However, on multivariate analysis, only severe disease was associated with increased mortality. So a limitation was a small sample size, which limited the significance testing in several of the parameters. And it's only a single center experience, but as per the previous speaker also, I think it shows a similar pattern, especially here in South India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a nice observational study from your center. I just want to, did you differentiate between the patients who were treated with remdesivir or other groups and the ones who were not treated? Did you find any difference in the treatment groups, that there was higher mortality in certain group and not in the other ones?
Sir, I haven't put up the slides, but patients who had in the second wave had more severe disease and therefore were more likely to be treated, but it was not statistically significant. So I didn't put it up in the slides because our numbers were on the smaller side. But more patients had more severe disease, so more steroids and remdesivir were used in the second wave as compared to the first wave.
Only remdesivir. What about tocilizumab or any other?
So we haven't used tocilizumab in any of our patients.
So how did you classify the disease severity? 1, 2, 3 grade?
Yeah, asymptomatic was just asymptomatic patients on routine testing. Mild was if they had fever, URI symptoms, cough, diarrhea, but no evidence of pneumonia. Moderate illness is patients having pneumonia, clinical evidence of pneumonia, but their saturations are more than 90%, respiratory rate less than 30 per minute. And severe illness is patients who have a saturation less than 90%, respiratory rate more than 30. This is the standard definition as per the WHO clinical severity.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Jit.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll have Dr. Vishnu Kirtana for the presentation on the topic outcome of renal transplantation from deceased diabetic donors.
This study regarding cadaveric deceased donor outcome in respect to the diabetic donors. So, in purpose of the study is to evaluate the recipient and renal outcomes of deceased donor in focus to the diabetic deceased donors. So, this will help to counsel the patients for recipients for the accepting diabetic donor kidney along with the other KDPI scoring system. So, they can think about the accepting diabetic donor versus remaining in the waiting list for transplant. So this is a single center based study. Is a retrospective study. When study duration was 2013 to 20, and the total DDRT were included were 126 recipients. So this is the study design. Period is 2013 to 20. Total 339 renal transplants were happened in our center. In this LRRT were 213 were excluded. In DDRT only 8 were diabetic donors and non-diabetic donors were 118. So we have studied the outcomes in two groups, diabetic donors and non-diabetic donors. And the outcome, primary outcome measure was graft function, immediate graft function as immediate graft function and slow graft function and delayed graft function. And patient survival and graft survival, these are the primary outcomes studied. As usual, delayed graft function is defined in this study as the requirement of dialysis in the first week of transplant, and slow graft function is serum creatinine more than 3 by more than day 5th of transplant. So the statistical analysis were used for SPSS version with ANOVA t-test for p-value calculation and for Peace and chi-square test to check the associations and check association between variables, and Kaplan-Meier estimates were used for patient and graft survival analysis. Coming to the results, this is the overall results in non-diabetic versus diabetic donors. Donors age diabetic was higher than the non-diabetic, along with the recipient age was also higher, and more of males are there in both groups in our center. Induction we have used as along with methylprednisolone, basiliximab and ATG were used. Immediate graft function, out of 8 recipients of diabetic donors, none was having immediate graft function. In non-diabetic donor, 8.5% have immediate graft function, and slow graft function in 37.2% in non-diabetic donors and 25% in diabetic donors. And delayed graft function is 75% in diabetic donors versus 54.5% in non-diabetic donors. With respect to slow graft function, the p-value is significant. Coming to the age and gender, the mean age of recipients were also higher in diabetic donors than non-diabetic, and males and females, males were more in both groups for recipients. And mean serum creatinine was 1.6 in diabetic donor recipients versus 1.2 in non-diabetic donor recipients. That immediate graft function was 25% in diabetic donor versus 37% in non-diabetic donors, and delayed graft function is significant with 75% chance of delayed graft function in diabetic donors. Graft survival was 80% in diabetic donors, and non-diabetic donors, this is 85%. And in diabetic donors, the patient survival was 80% in diabetic donors versus 85% in non-diabetic donors. And overall graft survival also, there is significant difference in diabetic donor with 70%, with the graft survival 92.6% in non-diabetic donors. So our study is compared with other two large studies. In Jordan B. Cohen et al., there is a large study with a total number of more than 1 lakh included. 1 lakh recipients were included. In this, diabetic donors are 9074. There, the study duration was almost 1994 to 2013. In our study, total 126, only 8 were diabetic donors. In another study, F. Khan et al., the total number of 49 were diabetic donors out of 706. In all these groups, male recipients were higher, and median age in years of recipients is 46 in our study and versus 50 in Cohen et al. Study. And graft survival in our group is 70%. In F. Khan et al., that is 66.6%, and delayed graft function in our study is significant with 75%, and the delayed graft function has correlated with the increased prolonged cold ischemia time in our study. So the conclusion of the study is, in our study, diabetic donor kidneys are associated with increased risk of mortality overall and increased risk overall of graft failure. And all recipients are tend to be older and males. In our study, all 8 recipients were also diabetic, so there is significant bias also. And study is useful for the patients to counsel regarding the acceptance of kidney. Still, further studies are needed to evaluate. So, if to enhance the monitoring, or RAS blockade can improve outcomes in diabetic recipients of diabetic donor kidneys. So, limitations of the study are single center study and small sample size and variable data, and significant bias is also there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vishnu, for a very good observation. So overall, what we conclude from your observation is that the outcome is not satisfactory in the diabetic donor group. And what are the reasons for an immediate graft dysfunction in your group? Because there is no improvement in immediate graft function in your group, in any of your 8 patients.
Sir?
Yeah, could you hear me what I said? That you had an immediate graft function in all your patients. Now, none of the function worked, the kidney worked immediately post-transplant. So what is the reason?
Yes, sir. In diabetic donor, sir. Biopsy you have done, sir. All of them are showing ATN, sir, actually. ATN, 7 or ATN, one is having acute resection, sir.
So very high ATN in your group. And secondly, your survival is for how long? Is it 1 year survival or 3 year survival? What you have mentioned?
This is 3 year survival. 3 years survival, sir. Mean follow-up was 4 years, sir. 3 years survival, sir. This is.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Nice.
Moderator, kindly note that Dr. Vatsalyan is facing some technical issues, so he won't be able to present today. With this, we have come to an end for the session 1 of free paper topic, and I thank all the speakers and moderators for their valuable time.